Hi, folks. Welcome back to another episode of ICIC, Intimacy, Choreography in Conversation, with my incredible co-host, Ann James, and me, Carly D.W. Bones. How you doing, Ann?
I could be better. I am so excited about this episode. I'm jumping out of my seat. Let's get started.
Me too. We have a very special guest who I am just elated to have on the show. The illustrious Tonia Sina is with us today. And welcome, Tonia. Would love if you can kick things off to just share a little bit about who you are, how you came to this work. Give us your origin story. We really love hearing the origin stories of folks in this field, and just like you are the mother of dragons, you're the one who birthed the terminology around this work, and would love to hear how you came to that. How and why did you get there?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be here today. Yeah, it's a story. So I started off as of course, as an actress, like we all kind of did, acting and performing and doing whatever. And as I grew into college, I started working on stage combat like crazy. I have kidney failure, and I've had kidney failure ever since I was 19. And it really influenced my ambition. I had no idea, how long I had to live, if I was going to make it to see 30, if I could ever have a normal life or anything like that. So from the get-go, I was already really driven to just be normal, quote unquote, as I used to call it. I wanted to be as good as everybody around me, if not better, even though I had a disadvantage. That was my goal. I didn't want anybody to know I had kidney failure for the longest time. So in college, I tried to overcome my physical ailments by focusing on combat. And I became one woman out of 6 other people that were men in a little stage combat club. And we shot videos and we choreographed all around Western New York. I went to Niagara University, way up in upstate New York. And so from there, knew I wasn't going to be able to be a performer forever with my health conditions, that I needed to find something more stable as a career. So I decided to go to graduate school at Virginia Commonwealth University to become a movement professor. And at the time, I didn't know what movement was. We didn't have movement when I was in college. We just had stage combat, we had dance, we had, all the different things, but we never had movement. And so in graduate school, I learned what that was and fell absolutely in love with the world of movement and what it means to interpret a body on stage and tell a story using only physical abilities, which was my weakness. So from there, I was hardcore fight director, really trying to excel as a woman in the field, which there weren't many of us at the time. It was very male dominated, still is, but it was much more male dominated back in the early 2000s. And so from there, I fell upon some situations, and I've been experiencing discrimination in the industry the whole time, but we didn't really think of it that way. It was just like, that's how it is. Women have to have a harder time out of this, and that's just how the industry is. So we're just preparing you for a very unforgiving field. And to me, that sounded absurd. I was like, well, why don't we just change the field?
Hell yeah.
Why are we training ourselves to deal with discrimination when we could just change the discrimination? Little did I know that was a simple idea, but very difficult to actually solve. So I was the youngest graduate student in that program. I was 23 when I started, and I was 26 when I wrote my thesis. So halfway through the program, people were starting to come and have scenes of, we called them sex scenes, just scenes where people had to kiss or grope or strip teases or lap dances, or it was graduate school. So there was a lot of graduate directors and they wanted to do risque stuff. As they were using undergraduates, my fellow movement majors who were older than I was and mostly male felt uncomfortable choreographing those moments. And I was like, do it. I just used all the knowledge that I had from choreographing fights and translated it in a way to choreographing scenes of intimacy. In one, you're kind of pushing at each other, and the other one, you're pulling at each other. So the energy didn't seem too different and was able to translating mass battles into mass orgies, which was really fun. In my second year, I was cast in a show in graduate school called Picasso de la Panagile.
Nice.
play
Yes.
Suzanne. And in that role, I was cast across from, his name is Jeff Cole. He's a good friend. At the time, we didn't actually have a lot of chemistry, you could say, which at the time I define very differently now. But at the time, we just didn't really get along. We were both shy. We didn't really have any way into these characters. We had to make out, really passionately on stage. And it always looked weird and it always looked forced. The director was like, you guys, you just have to, I don't know what's wrong. You just have to fix this. And so he sent us on, it was tech week and it was late. And he's like, you have to fix this. We're going up. He sent us into the lobby to practice after rehearsal one night when nobody was there. There was no stage management. There was nobody in the vestibule that we were in. It was just the two of us. We started doing our lines, whispering them, not the way we would have on stage, just sort of saying our lines and then just kissing. And the second that our lips touched, we both realized we weren't acting anymore. It was very suddenly, oh, this isn't a script. We're just making out in the lobby is what we're doing. And after that, we both were in relationships at the time, so that causes a little drama. And the next day in rehearsal, the scene looked amazing. It looked really passionate. It looked really real. And everyone was like, what's going on here? So rumors started about how this happened and what was going on between us. And as the female in the pairing, I got a lot of flack for that. I was the responsible one, how that works. So I started getting really upset by it and noticed that this is not the right way to do this. This can't be the right way to do this. I felt uncomfortable. Everyone was, talking about it. Was
of course,
everyone's business somehow. So by the end of the show, we had both broken up with our significant others to be together for a 1-month showmance. And we were terrible together. He didn't like vegetables and I'm Italian and there's spaghetti sauce. He wouldn't taste it. If he's listening, I'm so sorry, Jeff. But we broke up and we got back together with our original partners. And I decided I don't want to do that to my actors ever. I never want to put my actors in a position like that. It was unnecessary. It didn't need to happen. It messed up a lot. The roles even, like the magic of that moment rolled off stage and then it also rolled on stage. So I'm not sure how much acting we were actually doing in those moments. And it just seemed, to me at the time, it seemed like this isn't right. This isn't acting. I don't want to do this to my actors anymore. So I went to my mentors and I said, I think that there's something about choreographing these moments that they should be choreographed. They shouldn't be just improvised, because that doesn't seem to be the right way to do this. I don't even know if I'm telling the right story, And my mentors were like, I think that sounds great for you. And I was like, so who is doing this work? Is there anybody that I can call for my thesis? I want to write a thesis on this. Who can I contact to get more information about how to do this? And they were like, nobody's doing this. What do you mean nobody's doing it? Somebody's doing it. And they're like, nobody is a choreographer of just sex on stage. And I was like, okay, well, how am I supposed to learn this? Holy cow, am I the first person to think of this? Can't be right. It's so obvious, And they sent me to New York to Lincoln Center Library, where I watched shows and shows and shows from Pilobolus and from Merce Cunningham and modern dancers that were the closest. Modern dance was the closest to choreographing sex. And it wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I ended up writing a show that was all it was 9 or 10 scenes. It was all sex-based. I immersed myself in learning a technique on how to teach it. And by the end of that thesis, the process was pretty clear that with empathy and with giving the actors some support in a way of showing them what the story is and helping them guide them through the actual choreography, that even though it's choreographed, it doesn't have to look choreographed. It's very natural when you don't have to think about what you're doing while you do it, because they're not choreographers, they're actors, as we all know. So at the time, that was mind-blowing because nobody was doing this work. And by the end of that, I just wrote the thesis and I defended it. And I said, this should be a thing. I'm going to drop stage combat completely. And I'm going to call myself an intimacy director because I named it in the thesis. I said, I was looking for titles and I was like, sex choreographer? No. erotic choreographer, no sensual, no, I was close. I kept looking for words and I fell on intimacy, which just encompassed everything, you know? And I was like, that's the word. That's the word. And I remember the day I came up with it. It's like, it's intimacy, intimacy choreography, intimacy direction. I moved straight from graduate school to Oklahoma and worked there for 14 years, lived there for 14 years in the Bible Belt, working with very conservative students and actors. And it was actually good that they were conservative because it made me start from square one for people who weren't comfortable at all in their bodies. And being able to work with people like that made the technique that I used just honed in more and more. From there, things started to happen. But that's essentially how it started, was from a need of, okay, actors are getting hurt and embarrassed and humiliated, which is unnecessary. I don't want to do that to my actors anymore. And if nobody else wants to choreograph their sex scenes, whatever, I'm going to, because this is done the research. It's the best way to do it. There was no other question in my mind. So nobody could convince me otherwise, even though I had to defend it in my thesis. I had to be like, this is the right thing to do. And they're like, you're not going to change an industry. And I was like, well, I got to try. If nobody else wants to come with me, that's fine. But I'm going down this road.
And I'm so glad they were wrong because you really did. The industry is changed. Like there's a huge culture shift that's still evolving, but it's just wonderful to hear that story and just very affirming. This work comes from a place of care and from a place of wanting to get the storytelling right.
Right.
And that's really exciting.
Yeah. And which led to all these other aspects that we now know of, is the story being told? How is it being told? What's the stylization of the scene? All of things are all part of, movement, and it all fits under that category. So it just slid right into the work. It really didn't feel like I had to smash it in. And at first, people were pretty receptive. I was going to mostly men who happened to be the majority of people in charge at the time, still are, but they were mostly happy to give it over. Yeah. I'm not going to choreograph my undergraduates to be sexy, So at first it wasn't too bad. And it turned when it became more than just choreography, when it became, okay, but what are we doing to actors? What's the damage that's being done and what has been done and how can we stop that from happening more? And as I dug into that hole of, let's see what damage there's been, the gaping hole just opened and opened and opened and started becoming controversial.
That's so interesting that it's like not the technique or the storytelling that created like resistance or controversy, but like kind of the activism and care part that kind of had a
exactly.
pushback.
And originally it was the choreography. It was about the choreography. It was about working together in collaboration and making sure the actors had a voice in the room and that they weren't being forced to do things and they weren't, that they still had control of their body and their minds if they needed to. That's where it got really complicated, was when I was seeing the abuse under the surface. And, the controversy was, okay, well, if intimacy direction is going to lead us to exposing these dangerous people in the industry, that's when the pushback started coming.
Wow. Amazing. This is just so interesting to hear this lore and this first chapter of riding the crest of the wave of intimacy work.
Yeah.
What happened then? How did it continue to evolve?
Well, once I got to the Bible Belt and was working there, I was a professor. I was a full-time professor, a movement professor at 2 different schools in Oklahoma. I noticed right when I got there the gender inequality of the faculty and who was allowed to get away with what versus other people. And I was just young enough and ambitious enough, and I don't know when I'm going to die enough to really sink my teeth into it and try to expose. So the next journey was innocently starting my work in academia, thinking, I love being a teacher, and that's why I'm a professor. I love teaching. It's what I've been called to do. I love my students. I love teaching them to be more confident, and that's mostly what I was doing, trying to get them in their bodies, to trust their bodies, to not feel like there's anything wrong with their bodies, but that they could change if they wanted to, the way they move or the way they talk or the way they walk or all of those things. And that choreography is just that. It's just putting physical qualities onto yourself to alter the story. And then there's nothing about that that's right or wrong. There's telling the story or not telling the story. And so a lot of my classes were based on that. And also, I personally was going through a weird sort of advocacy double life in my rare disease advocacy and my having chronic illness and disability world. That world, I was in the hospital all the time. In 2010, I fell ill. We didn't know why. I had had kidney failure the whole time, but it was worse than kidney failure. There was something wrong. My blood was missing. We couldn't find it. And they kept giving me blood and it kept disappearing. Oh, nobody knew what was going on or why. And I was really on my last legs when at the time a female intern guessed while I was in the hospital, I was really, really, really not doing well. And she guessed that there was a paragraph in one of her textbooks that said, there's this disease that it could be. It sounds a lot like it, but I don't know. And even the male doctors that were my doctors were like, that's way too rare. There's no way that she has that. That's a children's disease. There's no way. Keeping in mind, I got sick at 18. So not a kid, but young enough. So they had ruled it out for years because they were like, she's not a kid. But this intern had them test my DNA, and send it off to a lab where they came back that I was positive for a disease called atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome. And what that disease is an autoimmune it's a blood disease that involves your immune system. It's like if I get a cold, my immune system turns on, but my body doesn't know how to turn it off. So it just starts attacking myself.
Yeah.
And one of the side effects is microscopic tiny blood clots in your veins. And it breaks apart your hemoglobin, which is the red blood cells. And they pop like balloons and they leave a chemical behind. And that chemical in my system was very, very high. So that's how they discovered it. So this was December that I was in the hospital discovering that I had this disease. In October, the previous October, 3 months before, this very expensive drug was just FDA approved to treat it. So had I needed it, had I been at this state 5 months before, I would have died. But I was just at the right time where this drug was available. And the doctor came in and said, good news is we have a diagnosis. Bad news is it's ultra rare, like 1 in 3.4 million people have this disease. The good news is there's a treatment that was just FDA approved 2 months ago. The bad news is it's the most expensive drug in the world.
Of course.
The good news is your insurance covers it. The bad news is you'll be on it for the rest of your life. The whiplash of all of this was just like, what? Okay. So there's a treatment and it's a terminal disease was how that ended. It's a terminal disease. And without this drug, you will die. So I started taking the drug, hoping this was going to be it. It was a not very well-known disease at all. So I was pioneering a disease, essentially, while I was pioneering intimacy direction. And so I think that gave me a lot of strength to push the envelope. I feel like it was like, well, I'm here for a reason and I survived this crazy thing. I must be here for some kind of reason and it must be to push buttons. So I'm going to do that because I don't want to see people get hurt anymore. And I don't want to see professor-student relationships anymore. I don't want to see inappropriate behavior that is affecting the education of these young people. So I sort of took up a torch on trying to fight that because it was very prevalent in the Bible Belt. I can name upwards of 7 different student-teacher relationships, all men.
Yikes.
Only 1 to 2 of them actually got punished for it. So that already was like, okay, it's the Bible Belt. I get it. So let's help them move forward. So from there, I became a little bit of a dark horse in the area. I was like, yeah, I'm not okay with this. We are not okay with this. And I was teaching students to not be okay with this. And so the students were now starting to come up with, like, they started to learn what Title IX was. They started to learn what their rights were. They started to learn what their powers were as students, that they were being empowered to take control of their education and to not let, these outdated systems and gender roles, frankly, stop them or hold them back. So I was in the theater, the head of the intimacy direction movement, and in the medical field, I was advocating for sexuality and disability, that people with disabilities are also sexual beings, and that is also part of their lives. And just because I might be in a wheelchair, just because I might have an IV attached to me, just because I have tubes coming out of me everywhere, doesn't mean I'm not a sexual being and that I don't have, normal parts that is just like everybody else. So I did a lot of pinup photography in the hospitals. There's pictures of me like hanging off of, IV pole and just taking different pictures of myself in sexy pinup outfits while I'm at the hospital. And that became an advocacy for the medical world that sort of blended in with the rest of it. That was just, my whole world was intimacy. So I was emboldened by all of this at the same time. And essentially, I started picking away at people who were getting away with things that shouldn't have been getting away with. And people were starting to get in trouble. And
having consequences for their actions.
Having consequences for their actions. Yes, exactly. It came from the students. It came from the victims of whatever the situations were. And so I sort of became associated with empowering students in a negative way. It seemed like I was starting a rebellion of students against, abuse.
Harm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Students against harm. You're the bad guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow. How is this controversial? How are students to not be harmed?
Well, I mean, remember, this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Where this was really risque to be doing. And the response, a very conservative area, and they weren't very sexually educated. And so there was a lot of that was, it's just conservative. They didn't talk about it, but there was things happening and nobody would just, everyone's like, no, none of my business,
Right. I think that's such a great point, is that just the act of not talking about something allows harm to happen. And just when you shed light on it, when you gave your students like frameworks in language and encouragement to empower them to speak up, it changed things.
Yeah. Well, the first lesson I had to teach them was that sex and love are two different things. And that just because you are performing a sexual act on stage does not mean you have to have love for that person. That was actually a very basic premise I had to teach, because in the conservative viewpoint, sex and love are entwined and you don't really separate them. So the whole thing of choreographing intimacy is you have to separate it. You have to. It's choreography, not real, Yes. So, so that concept was very new, and it was very outlandishly, what's the word? I was pegged as dangerous.
I have a follow-up question, Tonia. What were the women in these departments doing? What was their reaction?
A lot of rolled eyes. A lot of just like, well, we're all a team. The faculty is a team. And so, we sort of defend ourselves. He's contributing in these other ways, and that's helpful. So, we can just ignore some of the bad behavior unless it becomes a problem, unless it becomes a big problem, and then we can handle it. But there was more of like a faculty protection around, this is our team and we will protect them. Just like most businesses, that if it's like you protect your own. And that's a lot of what was happening. I eventually left academia mostly because of this. I wasn't rehired at one of the universities, and I became an adjunct again. When I left, I was really kind of bitter because I had gotten all these awards for teaching and directing, and all the shows that I was doing were like doing really well. They were going to ACTF and winning a ton of awards. And I was still let go from my job. And that was when I started, I think maybe went a little too far with my Italian anger. I've almost revenge partied a little. To be honest, I was dying. So I was like, well, if I'm not going to be teaching and I am trying to run an intimacy direction from my bed, from a sick bed, if I feel good, I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend time with people and I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do, because I was young. I was still in my 30s, but I was going up and down, in and out of hospitals. And so my life became a lot more of a party in my 30s. And there were rumors that became attached to me that I had an affair with a student, which is incorrect. It was unfortunate. But what I was told was, even if it's not true, the rumor is bad enough. And so you can no longer be a teacher in academia. So that's when I stopped teaching. I was let go from my adjunct job. And I wasn't allowed to direct anymore. I wasn't allowed to teach anymore. I was quoted as a bad influence on the students. And all my pictures were brought up. My hospital pictures were brought up in that as a negative, I was a negative role model for especially women. And from, my husband at the time was a professor. He went to my graduate program. So we were both professors at the time. And I was so angered at what was going on in the background that I wasn't paying attention to my own home. And it turned out years later, after I really started getting a groove into, because as soon as I was like, okay, fine, I'll go national. I don't need to be in Oklahoma. It's like, fine. You guys just let the movement hit you from the back when it comes back to hit you. You don't listen to me, that's fine, but it's coming and it's going to hit you in the ass. And I'll be there watching when it does. So, so that was kind of the standpoint I took. But it was revealed to me later that my own husband had an affair with a student. And I didn't know. And so while all this was happening, I lost my job for the rumor of being with a student. And he was not punished at all. So this became really personal at that point. And I left. I left him, I left Oklahoma, I left everything once I found out. And then the mystery was, well, did I know that whole time? And that's, I think a lot of people from that era aren't sure if I was a hypocrite trying to expose people when it was happening in my own home, and didn't expose him until I did. So I know this is very dramatic, but that's essentially what happened. And that's actually what led me to catapult out of Oklahoma and bring this to an international light of, okay, this is so rampant that it's happening everywhere, and it can be happening to anyone, including me. And it's not okay, really apparent. He did end up losing his job, and, rightfully so. But this was like years and years after. People knew, everyone knew but me, everyone knew. And they were, nobody was telling me that it was happening or that it had happened. So this was a very personal mission of mine. And I didn't want to make it about just the advocacy. I wanted it to be about the choreography. This is the movement, but you can't just change one thing. You can't just take a piece out of theater and say, okay, we're just going to shove this here and not change anything else. Everything else has to adapt around whatever you're trying to change. So the entire theater industry exploded, and then Me Too happened. Yeah. And it was right when the first Trump presidency happened, which led to the Me Too movement, which led to theater exploding into the Me Too movement. And it just kind of went from there. So all of intimacy direction became associated with advocacy in a very strong way. And for the next chapter, The question is, did it go too far?
Hi, I'm David Gonzalez, the co-producer and editor of Intimacy, Choreography, and Conversation. This season, we're doing something a little different. Each of our interviews will be split into 2 parts so that we can really sit with these stories and conversations. What you just heard was part 1 of our interview with Tonia Sina. In part 2, Tonia opens up about what it's like to step back from the movement she helped start, how surviving a rare terminal illness has changed everything, and why collaboration and grace are essential to the future of this work. It's a deeply personal continuation of the story, so do be sure to listen to the next episode. If you're enjoying the show, please follow or subscribe and leave us a review. You can find all of our links, including our social media and how to get in touch, at linktree/ICIC. That's spelled LINK_EE/ICIC. Every share helps us get new followers for the show. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in part 2.